In this video, we'll be looking at a very simple topic called the human cost of cheap goods. And this is an opportune topic in terms of current conversations because we are in the middle of what we call a tariff war. And this tariff war is between two major countries, which is USA and China. And most of the things that they are fighting over has to do with manufacturing and why American companies have moved almost 60% of their manufacturing jobs to China. To understand the problem better, you have to always remember that there is only one main reason why you would export your manufacturing, and I mean it in the inverse. And the reason is that you cannot be able to produce the goods effectively or efficiently in a cost-effective manner locally. That means if you're thinking about America, there are several factors that contribute to the overall profitability of any American company. The first one is the cost of goods sold, and within this you have two key elements, which is labor and we have taxation and any tax regime. This means that any organization that wants to increase their profitability needs to reduce their cost of goods sold, because again we are looking at sales minus cost of goods sold as the most simplistic formula for profitability on this end. There are two options therefore. You either increase the sales to keep these profit numbers good, or you reduce the cost and you look at two key avenues. Now, if you want to be also competitive in the global market, you cannot be able to produce the goods within a high cost structure, which America in this case is. So we shall look at the Apple company called Apple, and this is the first $1 trillion company, and walk through the various reasons why they opted to go for China. What were the challenges, and is there a good logic for Trump to insist on bringing these production jobs locally? Remember, as much as Apple is a $1 trillion company, it is very, very big on margins, and that's how they arrived at their financial performance. So for them to get there, they needed to find a market that has very cheap labor. And in labor economics, we say something very simple. If supply exceeds demand, the price goes down. And we are referring to the average wage. If you have a very large population of skilled employees, the average wage labor will equivalently go down. And this is one of the biggest reasons why Apple decided we need to settle on China. The next thing within labor is regulation, and in this case I am speaking about minimum wage. When you're thinking about China, their regulation in terms of the treatment of employees, human rights violation, all those things are very loose, and it allowed their suppliers within the Chinese economy to do very grotesque things. For example, there are two companies that Apple used in China. The first one is called Foxconn, and the second one is called Pegatron. And BBC did a very good expose and showed the extent to which the human rights violation were committed within these two companies. The employees were in crammed up dormitories. They were working more than 12 hours a day, and there were serious cases of suicides. That's the first thing. There were serious cases of abuses with employees who are sleeping on their job in a production line. There were also serious cases in terms of wage rights of employees. Remember, America is highly unionized, yes, but China is very loose in terms of these things. So we can clearly see, as much as there are suicides, as much as there are human rights abuses within these two companies, Apple was benefiting from a very large profit margin, and this is coming from savings in terms of labor. Now, the second reason that Apple opted to pick China is taxes, and there was a tax loophole. And the tax loophole was China would prefer to be an export-based country, and to do this you can devalue your currency. That is one of the options that they have. And the second one is you make it very easy to export by making it tax-free. Therefore, when you're thinking about China, they say on the export side, we will not charge you any tax for those goods to leave. You are our customer, Apple. Now, when you go to the USA company, they want to make sure that the American market is populated with good products that are basically under American ownership. Therefore, they had a policy where if it is an American brand to import within the American market, it is going to be tax-free. Therefore, Apple noticed these two key opportunities. The first one, there is a very good tax loophole, and the second one, we are getting cheap labor. And if you're asking yourself how Apple has been able to compete against giants within the Asian market, Samsung, Huawei, and all the others, these are the two main variables that have contributed to Apple being competitive globally. Now imagine tariffs that have been introduced by the current president Donald Trump. These tariffs will increase the price of these goods on the Chinese side and on the American side. The global market is supplied through the American supply chain and the Chinese supply chain. Therefore, when Donald Trump was giving exemptions to the taxes, he was very specific not to touch electronics and in particular phones for this particular reason. It would eat into the profitability of the company. It would eat into the ability of the company to be able to supply the global market in terms of the product which has been demanded for. And that momentary gap within the supply chain can create a problem or a loophole that would introduce another competitive company that would eat into Apple's market share. And there, guys, you have it. The reasons why we think that cheap goods are not the best. On the human element, we have the Chinese economy that has produced and has supplied cheap labor to the global economy. They are supplying not only America but also Africa and South America. They are basically a monopoly because of their cheap labor, which is the biggest function when it comes to the cost of the final product. But when we look at the human rights violation, we want to ask ourselves, is this problem actually commensurate with the benefit that we are having? We are having people committing suicides in our name because the biggest company that uses Pegatron and Foxconn, 40% almost, is Apple. Are we going to condone suicides? Are we going to condone human rights violation? Are we going to condone exploitation in terms of wage income in exchange for a cheap price or in exchange for a globally competitive product? That's it, guys, for this video. You be the judge.